Hey everyone. So this video is introducing some additional functions that are in the Tidyverse package and world. And so watching Elise's video before this one is pretty essential just to get down some of the basics of using pipes, filtering, selecting, things like that. So with this video, we're going to talk about mutate, group by, and summarize functions specifically. And so for this, we'll need to load the tidyverse, and we'll also need to import the surveys data set because we're going to be working with that data. And so one of the first things that we're going to talk about is mutate. And so there might be some cases where you want to create a new column of data in your data frame. And so there's this really handy function, mutate from Tidyverse, that can help with that. So let's first create an object, and I'm just going to call it the same name, surveys. I don't mind if what we do here replaces the original surveys object. So we'll call up the data frame surveys. We'll insert a pipe, space down, and we'll type out this function mutate. So as we can see, my computer is popping up with this window that says mutate, create, modify, and delete columns. And it just gives a definition for what it does exactly. So that's handy. So let's practice creating a column of weight, but in kilograms. So there is an existing column in the data frame called weight, which I believe is in grams. So we're going to divide by 1,000 and saved this object. I know before there were 13 columns and now there's 14, but let's actually look at what we've created here. So I'm going to use the structure function. And we can see that there is a new column at the end of this data frame called weight, kilograms. So what if we wanted to add multiple columns? We can take the same code that we were using before. So we created a column named weight kilograms. But say we wanted to actually double each of those values. So we create a second column, which you can do inside of the mutate function. You can add multiple columns at once. And we can actually call up the value that we made on the line prior to this and use that to create a new column. So let's look at our results. And here we go. We have a lot of NAs, but for the one that there is a value, we can see that in fact, it doubled the value right here. So that's great. Let's use what we learned about missing data to actually filter out some of those NAs. And that way we can look at the data a little more clearly. And so I'm just going to copy and paste what we wrote on lines 11 to 13, just because it can be a little tedious to type these things again and again. So I've copied here, and I mentioned that we want to filter out the NAs, so we can actually add a filter here in line 18, and we'll use the exclamation mark to filter out the NAs. Okay, so let's run that and let's see what it says. So now when I look at the output, we have all values in the weight columns. Another function that we were using and that we learned about in class last week was head. And we could use that in this case, but the thing is, it only shows the first 6 columns. I think first 10 columns. And so then the rest of the columns are actually not shown, which is okay. Like we, are interested in filtering out the weight. And so we could see that here, like, in fact, we have filtered out the NAs. So just it's kind of user's preference in which way you like to examine your data frame. But as most things with R, there are multiple ways to do that. Great. So there is a challenge in the tutorial here if you want to work on it. We also might have time in class, but this will help combine some of the different skills that we've been learning about so far. So check that out if you have time. And now I want to move on to 2 additional functions called group by and summarize. And a lot of data manipulation requires you to split the data into different groups and then perform some type of analysis and then bring the results of that analysis back together. And so these 2 functions, group by and summarize, do pretty much that. And they're often used with one another. And so group by essentially allows you to perform an analysis on certain groups in your data. And so by the nature of that, it requires some sort of categorical variable. So in our data set here, I know that we have this character variable sex, and so we can use that to set the group by. And we're going to use mutate to create a new column, and we're going to calculate mean weight. So we can use that mean function that we learned about this past week. And we know that there are some NAs in our weight. Actually, we did filter those out. So let's see what happens if we just run it like this. And so this spits out some values, but we don't get the values in the mean weight column like we would like. And so I'm going to actually save this as a new object called surveys2. And let's look at the structure of surveys2. And so now we can see that we have some values for mean weight that were calculated here. And it looks like they are all the same. So that's interesting. And, it's hard to actually understand what's going on here. If we were to leave every single row of data in our data frame. So up until now, it was okay to do mutate because we were interested in a value for each unique observation. But in this case, we just want to know the weight by each group in the sex column. And so that's where the summarize function is really handy. So we can take what we did before for surveys2, but instead of mutate, we're going to use the function summarize. And then we can look at some of the key differences here. And I'm going to actually call this surveys3. And so if you look over at my global environment, you'll see just a big difference here. So surveys2 had the same number of rows as the original, where surveys3 only has 3 observations or 3 rows. So let's look at what those values are. And so we can see here that it was basically our summarize the weight per sex, which is exactly what we wanted. And those are the only values that it gave us. So this is why summarize can be really helpful and clean. But what about if there are multiple groups that we want to know the weight for? So we can copy and paste the same code for surveys 3, but let's add an additional category of species ID and hit run on that. And let's look at the output. So now we can see we have a bunch of different combinations of groups and the mean weight in each of those groups. Great. So last thing I wanted to show you all is right now the weight is not in like a specific order. And so you might be in a situation where you actually want to, look at weight in descending order or ascending order. And so a really useful function for doing that is actually the arrange function. And so let's take this code from line 34 to 36 on my computer and paste that down here. And so I just want to show you all what happens when we use the function arrange, which essentially we're just going to put in the mean weight column itself and hit run. And now you'll see that the output actually has the lowest weight, and then it's ascending in this order. And then if you wanted to look at it like at the max weight and lower, you can actually put a dash in front of this value, and it will then cause it to descend from the max value. So those are just some interesting things to play around with and check out. One other thing I wanted to point out was if you wanted to summarize multiple values, you can do that fairly easily as well. And so let's take the same set of code that I just typed out. We'll say multiple columns. So we can also calculate min weight. So min weight. And then now it'll give us another column here. So that's very similar to what we were doing earlier with the mutate function. But yes, you can have multiple new columns in this function as well. So that's where I'll end with this. And we'll see you in class this week. Thanks.